Hello and welcome back to Israel with Aline. Today we came to Lachish and we will see the glorious past of this city, like the palace of the kings of Judah. We will also learn about the great battles that took place here, including one that almost decimated the 12 tribes of Israel. And we will end the day seeing archaeological findings that prove the fulfillment of biblical prophecies. So if you are ready, let's get started. We will start today's tour almost 3,000 years ago, right at the entrance of Lachish. Here beside us is the city's entrance gate, but before we cross through it, I want you to see what's here beside us. We see a small part that remains of the Great Wall of Lachish. And to be quite honest, there wasn't just one wall here in the city, but two. It's something that's not normal in biblical cities. Here, there were two concentric walls, and this shows how much the city was protected and how important this center was to the kings of Judah. And they really wanted to protect the great city of Lachish at any cost. Here then, we see a little piece of the city's outer wall, and further up there was a second wall. And in biblical times, everyone could only enter through the city's only entrance, which was precisely this one. So if we talk about the kings of Judah, the prophets from all over the world, they all passed through this gate that we are also entering now. So the person who entered the city already came across here with the great fortification of the walls, and also here with the two protection towers. This and this were large towers that watched over the city. And the person could then enter and see all this courtyard. Here there were 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, soldiers prepared for anything that happened. And also often here at the gate could sit judges, governors, and also on some rare occasions the very king of all Judah could sit here in this courtyard. So really a reception with all the pomp happened here. All of this here is still part of the city entrance. Come with me. And it's not over, folks. Here's another door, and the moment we cross through it, where do we arrive? At the second gate complex. Yes, this is what is called the inner gate, and it had 6 rooms. So we see here the first, the second, the third, and on this side exactly the same thing. And in these rooms, 5 of them had military and administrative functions. But the 6th room that we are going to enter now, precisely we can see here that the archaeologists have put back a roof here. Come in here with me. We just entered a small temple, but a temple that belonged to the people of Israel. And there is something wrong here, because if we are saying that this place is less than 3,000 years old. At this time, the Temple of Jerusalem, the Temple of Solomon, had already been built, and there is an explicit prohibition in the Bible to build altars and temples outside of Jerusalem. This place is archaeological evidence that the people of Israel were breaking God's commandments. At that time, there were people who did not comply with what was written in the Bible, and we also know that even today this happens. But let's understand what this place really is. We enter it, and here we have a first room that is called the Holy Place. And remember that by the model of the tabernacle and also by the model of the Jerusalem temple, there was a partition that in this case was a cloth. In Hebrew, we call it parosh, the veil. And the moment you crossed through the veil, you arrived at the Holy of Holies. And now we enter and are inside the equivalent of the Holy of Holies, the most holy of the Jerusalem temple. But in the Jerusalem temple, when you entered, what you saw was the Ark of the Covenant. And here there was not, or if there was, it has not survived to this day. What was indeed found here is this stone. It was an altar, a four-horned altar, as described many times in the Bible. Just like the temple of Jerusalem itself, the altar also had four horns. I imagine all of you must have noticed what's here in the background. This here is a latrine, an 8th century BC toilet. The question is, what is a toilet, what is a bathroom doing inside the Holy of Holies? Wasn't it for the use of the high priest? We know that in the Temple of Jerusalem, in the tabernacle, inside the Holy of Holies, there were no bathrooms. Don't you want to mix the two things? Holiness with something literally dirty? So why is there a toilet here? We know the answer in the Bible itself. When the people of Israel sometimes followed other paths and they did some things that were not 100% correct, like building temples outside of Jerusalem without following God's ordinances. Some kings tried to correct this and some kings made religious reforms. One of these kings is King Hezekiah. He goes to various temples here throughout the kingdom of Judah and seals them, covers them, and takes them out of use. And we imagine that this is exactly what happened in this place, that King Hezekiah takes this temple out of use, but he also wanted this place not to be used again, and so he does a few more things to ensure that it would not be reused later. One of the things he does is break the horns of the altar, and the second thing he probably does is install this latrine. It is not connected to the personal sewage system. Nobody ever really used it, but the idea was that if someone in the future tried to come here, clean this place and start using it again, they would come across the toilet and say, "Oh, no, we're not going to use this place as a holy place." We know that the one who also used this trick was precisely King Jehu, the king of Israel, from the northern kingdom. He also builds latrines in places that were used for the worship of Baal. So it's more or less the same technique so that the temple won't be used again. And that's why everything we know from the biblical description here was really found written in stone. To understand the history of Lachish, we first need to understand the history of the kings of Israel and Judah. Originally, this whole region was one kingdom called the Unified Kingdom of Israel, and over it reigned Saul, David, and then Solomon. But after Solomon, this great kingdom was divided into two. The northern kingdom came to be called the Kingdom of Israel, and it was governed Jeroboam, and here the southern region was called the Kingdom of Judah, and Rehoboam, Solomon's son, reigned over it. And one of the first things Rehoboam does as king is to fortify some of the cities of Judah, among them Lachish. And now behind us is the palace of the kings of Judah. The first of the kings of Judah, as we mentioned, was Rehoboam. But the question is, what is the palace doing here if the capital was in We know there was the main palace, but there was also a summer palace, a winter palace. In different areas, they had different palaces. So this was one of the palaces of the kings of Judah, and it was built right here, because Lachish was the second most important city of Judah, only surpassed by Jerusalem. But Jerusalem was the religious and political capital, but Lachish at that time, almost 3,000 years ago, was economically larger than Jerusalem and probably also had a larger population. We can compare it with Brazil of today. What is the capital of Brazil? Brasilia. It functions in practice as the political capital, but if we're talking economically and population-wise, the most important city in Brazil is São Paulo. And here we see exactly that. Laqui would be the equivalent to São Paulo and Brasilia to Jerusalem. Jerusalem to this day is the capital of Israel, and that's why these chairs were placed here to symbolize thrones. Obviously, they are modern, but if we get here, each of these chairs is one of the kings of Judah. And now I ask you, put your answer here in the comments. Why do the chairs have backs of different sizes? Why is Amon much smaller than Manasseh? Why is Josiah larger than Joash? What is the difference in the height of the backrests? Did you understand? The height of the backrest is proportional to the number of years these kings reigned. So it doesn't mean that one king is better than the other. On the contrary, we know that there are some very problematic kings in the history of Judah, but here, for example, is Hezekiah, and he is represented not by his historical importance, but by the number of years he reigned over Lachish, Jerusalem, and all of Judah. And now we're going to enter the palace of the kings of Judah. Come with me. Is it any wonder that the kings of Judah chose this location for their palace? Look at the view we have here, a 360-degree view where we can see distant territories and also spot enemy troops approaching from afar. So it really is a strategic point to control not only Lachish, but also the entire region. And speaking of wars, battles, and enemies, we are going to learn the history of this together now. To talk about wars and battles, we precisely left the walls of Lachish. And the story does not start here. It starts in the northern kingdom, in the kingdom of Israel. Because in the year 734 before Christ, the kingdom of Israel was invaded by the Assyrians. And it was really a devastating invasion. They destroyed the cities and take the population, which was the majority of the 10 tribes of Israel, and send them into exile. And these people never returned, and that's why they are known as the 10 lost tribes of Israel. The Assyrians, not content with destroying 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, they head south and begin the invasion of the kingdom of Judah. They go from town to town, destroying, burning, killing, enslaving, and also beginning to exile their population. They destroy the entire kingdom of Judah except for 2 cities, the 2 main cities, Lachish and Jerusalem. And the very king of the Assyrians, Sennacherib, comes here personally to try to destroy the city of Lachish. But this was not an easy task at all. We saw the colossal gate, the protection that this city had, a gigantic amount of soldiers. In addition, a double concentric wall, and perhaps the most difficult of all, is that it is on top of a hill. And Sennacherib and his men are here. And they are now thinking about how they are going to invade that city. Because if they tried one by one to scale the wall, scale this whole complex, the Jewish population inside would be able to repel them. And that's why Sennacherib comes up with a gigantic and diabolical plan. What he decides to do here is to build a colossal ramp, a ramp that originally was between 80 and 90 meters. And it started here and it went straight up to the inner city wall. And all these stones that we see here are a small part that remains of this gigantic ramp. And the archaeologist Joseph Garfinkel estimates that 3 million stones were used here in this construction. Of course, we see here a small part of this ramp that survived, but this gives us an idea of the grandeur of this construction. And how long did it take for them to bring 3 million stones here? Only 20 days. They had an average of 160,000 stones placed per day. I don't know which army of today would be capable of carrying out such a large and fast project. And they managed to do it 2,700 years ago. And after 20 very intense days of building this ramp, Sennacherib's army begins to ascend and a very intense battle begins. Because during these 20 days, the Jews who were up there, they were not standing still waiting. They built a counter ramp inside the walls so that the attack would be on equal terms. But unfortunately, we know the outcome of this war. The result is an overwhelming victory for Sennacherib, a victory that he is so proud of that he had it recorded in Nineveh. When archaeologists arrived in Nineveh, which is now in Iraq, they found the remains of Sennacherib's palace. And when they entered one of the rooms, they saw all the walls around reporting a great battle in the smallest details. And at the end of these drawings, they found an inscription that tells that it is precisely the Battle of Lachish. So look how impressive this battle is reported both by the winners, that is by the reports of Sennacherib that were found in Nineveh. This conquest is also reported in the Bible, which unfortunately this time the people of Israel lost. And also this battle here is proven through archaeology. There are few places in the world where we have the account of the winners, the losers, and also the archaeology here. And really what was found was this giant ramp, and on this ramp hundreds and hundreds of spear tips, tips also used in bows and arrows as reported by Sennacherib. But also Sennacherib, he records his cruelty because he reports not only how he wins the battle, but he also reports the tortures that were done against the Jews here. Impalements and so many other things that I really can't even tell you here on YouTube. And right here next to it, a cave was found with 1,500 human remains. And in these human remains, you can see precisely this torture carried out by Sennacherib. So he really, with all the hatred, with all this horror inside him, he unleashes it against LAQUIS and he destroys the city. The only city that could stop his army before Jerusalem. But they can't. And after he's done with Lachish, he sends his men to Jerusalem. And when they get to Jerusalem, they were sure they were invincible. They defeated the 10 tribes of Israel. They practically defeated the entire kingdom of Judah. They defeated 46 fortified cities. Only one was left, Jerusalem, and they were sure they would win. And that's why they go and mock the God of Israel. They mock Hezekiah, the king who was inside the city. But the only one who could save Jerusalem was not the king, but God. But even with Sennacherib on the way, Even knowing everything he had done, Isaiah, the prophet of God, tells Hezekiah, the king of Jerusalem and king of all Judah, that he did not need to worry because God would save the city. And Hezekiah, he listens to the prophet. He does not surrender, and God's plan goes into action. And so at the last moment, God saves what was left of the 12 tribes of Israel. God sends an angel who goes to the Assyrian camps, and he ends up killing 185,000 soldiers in the same night. Look at the size of Sennacherib's force. And when Sennacherib finds himself defeated in this way and sees that none of his physical strength was comparable to God, he really decides to turn around and leave. And he returns to Nineveh, to his palace, where he records his victory, and where he is also later killed by his own sons. So it's a terrible end for a terrible person. But this story, no matter how many negative points there are in it, we see how God goes and saves the 12 tribes of Israel, or what was left of them. But what does the archaeology of Lachish have to do with the fulfillment of biblical prophecies? To see this, we will now go back to the city gate. So let's go in together once more. You must be recognizing the colossal entrance of the city. And when people arrived and passed through here, I imagine that this small side room might even go unnoticed. But in this room, the greatest treasure was found of LAQUIS's archaeology. Here, exactly where we are, the letters of LAQUIS were found. There are just over 20 letters found in archaeological excavations from 1935. But the name is a bit misleading. When we talk about LAQUIS's letters, not all of them were really letters. They are a series of pieces of pottery with different inscriptions, some a bit more bureaucratic. For example, administrative lists with names, dates, and numbers. Others were simply drafts, others are completely illegible. But the important thing is that these inscriptions are dated from the 7th and 6th centuries before Christ, but this is after Sennacherib, after the destruction of the city. What happened to Lachish? The city was completely destroyed, burned, and razed by Sennacherib and the Assyrians. But then the city managed to rise again, and once again it was a major administrative center here in Judah. However, a little over 100 years later, the city once again found itself threatened. These letters that we are seeing here are from the time of the prophet Jeremiah. And during this period, the land of Israel was once again threatened by a great enemy empire. This time it was not the Assyrians but the Babylonians. The Babylonians begin to conquer the entire region. And the prophets of Israel, especially Jeremiah and Uriah, tell the king what he should do. They prophesy that one should not fight against the Babylonians, but rather surrender to them. Be careful, do not ally yourselves with the Egyptians. All of this is reported in the Bible. The prophets Uriah and Jeremiah tell the kings what they should and should not do. Especially Jeremiah speaks to King Zedekiah, do not ally yourself with the Egyptians, but surrender to the Babylonians. Because if you don't do this, be careful, because you will be destroyed. And not only the king, the entire kingdom, including Lachish. And what does this have to do with these letters? The letters that were found, they are written in ancient Hebrew. Here we see two of them, they are enlarged here. For you to have an idea, this one, for example, was 12 centimeters. But the letter, in my opinion, the most important among them is letter number 3, which is a correspondence between two generals of King Zedekiah. Your servant Oshiah was sent to inform my lord Joash. It was reported to your servant, saying, the commander of the army, Koniao, son of Elnatan, arrived to descend to Egypt, and about Hododiah, who son of Ahiahu, and his men he sent to get from him. And as for the letter of Tobias, servant of the king, which came to Salem, son of Jaddua, through the prophet, saying, beware, your servant sent it to my lord. These two generals of King Zedekiah are reporting the story as it is happening in their days. They say that there is a delegation of the people of Israel that was sent to Egypt. This means that the people of Israel were allying themselves with the Egyptians and not surrendering to the Babylonians. And the prophet was saying, be careful. Who is the prophet? We are not sure. It's like nowadays we often say the president, the prime minister, and if I say the prime minister of Israel said such a thing, everyone knows who the prime minister is. And so in this letter sent, the two knew who the prophet referred to. We are not sure, but experts believe that this prophet reported in this letter is probably the prophet Jeremiah. So they are reporting that they are disobeying the prophet, despite the prophet having warned them that they should not do this. It's impressive how the pieces are fitting together. They know that the prophet said not to do it, yet Zedekiah's decision was precisely to ally himself with Egypt. For years and years and years, Jeremiah warns them what should be done, what God's orders were. However, Zedekiah does not listen, and unfortunately, Jeremiah will witness the fulfillment of his own prophecies. Because Jeremiah sees the Babylonians invading the region and moving from city to city, destroying all the territory where they passed. And Jeremiah tells us that there are still 3 cities standing: Azekah, Lachish, and Jerusalem. And it's even chilling, knowing everything we know now, to read letter number 4. Letter number 4 says that they are here in the city and that they no longer see Zekah. What does that mean? The last 3 cities that were standing, Zekah, LAQUIS, and Jerusalem, how did they communicate? With smoke signals. This was a common practice of the people of Israel over centuries. Because if you need to pass a quick message from one city to another, you're not going to run from here to Jerusalem, 40 kilometers up the mountains. You're going to make smoke signals. And that's how messages were passed. This was called the matzut. So the generals and the population that was here in Lachish knew how Zekah was doing through the smoke signals. And one day they look and they no longer see the smoke from Azekah sending messages to them. And then they understand that the city of Azekah was destroyed. Soon after, also Lachish. And then the troops move up to Jerusalem. Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians lay siege to Jerusalem. But this time God does not save the city. And Jerusalem is completely destroyed and burned. Solomon's temple was in ruins, and thus completes the exile of the 12 tribes. 10 of them had already been taken by the Assyrians, and most of those who had stayed this time were expelled by the Babylonians. The fall of Azekah, Lachish, and Jerusalem marks the end of a very important period for the people of Israel. But what I find impressive is that here we have 2 parallel stories. We have the prophet Isaiah speaking to King Hezekiah, saying, don't worry, God will save the city. And God really does save it. More than 100 years later, another prophet of God comes along. More than one prophet, including Uriah and Jeremiah. And they speak to the king, "Be careful, do not join the Egyptians, but surrender to the Babylonians." And in a short time, they see this prophecy coming true. The generals who wrote these letters, the generals who were here, they knew what the prophet had said. The people knew, but still, for some reason, they decided not to obey. And they saw the prophecy being fulfilled right before their eyes. So in letter number 3, they talk about the prophet, and in letter number 4, they see the prophecy being fulfilled in their days, because Zechah falls, and after that the rest of the kingdom, and so the people of Israel were taken into exile. There are dozens of prophets in the biblical period. Some prophecies are fulfilled a few months or even a few years after they were written or spoken. Other prophecies take centuries or even millennia to be fulfilled. And even to this day here in Israel, we witness the fulfillment of biblical prophecies. And that's why I think Lachish is a very important reminder that we need to have faith in the Word of God and believe in the fulfillment of His Word, both in the past and in the present day. Some prophecies are difficult and painful, but there are so many other prophecies that say such beautiful and special things about Israel. Also prophecies from Jeremiah that say that after the exile, the people would return to their land. And indeed, we saw that this happened. The Babylonian exile ended and the people returned to their land, only to be expelled again by the Romans. But the return from the Roman exile took almost 2,000 years. But with patience, God's word also came true. And that's why in 1948, Israel once again manages to declare its independence. And that's why Israel is the land of the fulfillment of God's word. In the past, in the present, and also in the future, I hope you enjoyed today's video and get to know a little more here from Lachish. Don't forget to leave your like a kiss and see you next time.